I'm Karen. For people who don't know me, just to introduce myself a wee bit, I'm working as a researcher in OCD, in fact, particularly on seeking help for OCD, based in Bath. But what I'm going to be talking about today is my experience of having OCD, seeking help, and CBT. And as part of it, I'm including a little excerpt from a tape from one of my early therapy sessions with Paul. Because one of the difficulties I found beforehand was trying to imagine what on earth CBT would actually be like. It was a horrible, horrible name, nothing that really sort of drew me to the subject, but I just couldn't imagine, so I just brought that along just in case that would help people who've not had it yet. Within a week or two, it's coming back. It's coming to the new place. I didn't seek help till I was 42, so 24 years after it started. That is from the GP. And major reason for me for that was that my fear of having a mental health record, what effect that would have on my career, my work, and my confidence, I think, as well. But also a lot of fear of the mental health system and the mental health professionals that I might encounter along the way. And so, I mean, in normal life, we're very selective, I think, about who we share personal and intimate and painful things with. And we share a bit more according to the reaction we get back. Whereas in this situation, you're meant to go into a room with somebody you've never met before and start sharing big stuff. And I was really frightened I wouldn't feel that trust necessary. But I eventually went, early 40s. And GP was okay, but not. She had a lay knowledge, I suppose, of OCD. By that time, I knew quite a lot more. But the main thing I was asking for a referral, and she granted me that. This was before improving access to psychological therapies, which you'll be hearing more about. And I got to my local mental health team, see a trainee, a trainee clinical psychologist who was extremely pleasant, but I didn't feel confident. Well, I asked him how much experience he'd had in treating OCD, and he hadn't had much. And I think by asking that question politely but very firmly, and also asking about the specialist clinics that were available in London, that in effect enabled me to get a referral direct to the specialist clinic rather than have CBT with him, which is what he was offering. So I'm comfortable saying that, asking those questions, especially when you're feeling vulnerable. And sometimes I think it bordered on anger, the way it came out. I don't know, the assertiveness, but it got me where I needed to go. So in fact, in terms of the steps that you're hearing today, I sort of jumped really from step 2 with the GP. I didn't have therapy at the local mental health, and I got straight to the specialist clinic. But a 6-month wait in between. But got to the specialist clinic, so we've got therapists who are doing specialist CBT for the different anxiety disorders all day long. After the 6 months, saw the first therapist there, who was expert in OCD. That's what she did. And from my angle, it went disastrously. I think I had 3 sessions with her, and we couldn't get as far as actually starting the CBT because I just didn't feel comfortable, or it was stronger than that. I didn't feel at all comfortable with her, with working with her. I didn't feel I was being treated as an equal human being. So definitely the worst time in the whole treatment journey was that period. And the feeling, I've got the mental health record now, sought help, that's irreversible, got to the specialist clinic, and I can't work with this person. So absolutely awful time, up night after night after night. But when I started to say some of that, a system kicked into play incredibly powerfully, effectively. So there was a system whereby there was a meeting arranged between the therapist, me, and one of the directors of the clinic. And I also saw that the director of the clinic on my own, and from that I was able to actually have a big input really into the decision making about who I would see, and I was able to see somebody else, and that ended up being Paul. So again, extremely stressful, but the outcome was incredible. So, CBT and Paul. I think we'll move over to, so this session, I'm just going to play you 10 minutes of a therapy session. It was session 5. I'd had a lot of problems in the early sessions trying to feel trust in Paul, but also my relationship, the best relationship I've had in my life, broke down in that time. So we spent a whole session on that. So that was the context of it. And when Paul was listening to me on the breakdown of the relationship, I felt absolutely fine. When Paul was listening to me, I really wanted to tell my story, you know, this OCD story from when I was 18, absolutely fine. When we started on the CBT, I was finding him too much, really. The question, I felt bombarded with the questions. And so at the beginning of the session we talked about that. But we're now actually moving on to the CBT. And so to sort of talk a bit, just summarise a bit on the CBT. I had 50 to 60 sessions. They're nothing like the 12 that are offered that sometimes you hear about as standard. Most of the time it was on the OCD, but there was also a lot of time actually on wider things, because by that time I was really quite chronically depressed, I would say. So dealing with the damage that having had OCD all that time had caused in my life. And then indeed the regret after the sort of elation of what specialist CBT could do, then the intense regret that I hadn't sought help earlier and dealing with that. I also had a diagnosis, which I didn't learn till later actually, of obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. And one of the things within that is, or can be, a sort of difficulty being spontaneous. And we did work on that, which was some interesting homework tasks. And we did also some work, quite intensive work, I would say, on the original trauma that had preceded the OCD starting. Just a few more minutes. And this is one of the wider sessions, which wasn't specifically on OCD, but we was talking about home. Extremely painful session. I cried most of it, as I recall. With Paul holding up this vision of what home could be, and the nurturing place, and the place that you would, you know, seek refuge in. And me thinking just to myself, you know, what my experience of it had been all those years, and all the times I tried to move. And the contrast between was almost unbearably painful. It felt a bit brutal, really, at the time. But moving on a few years, that's what I was thinking of. I was moving to Bath and house hunting, and I must have viewed, I don't know, a lot of properties, I can tell you. And each time trying to hold in my mind that thing from that session of somewhere that you just would love to go home to. Not just it would be nice, but a real yearning, a real longing. And I found somewhere, and I just completely fell in love with it. I couldn't believe that you could live somewhere with views like that. I'd come from East London, and I put an offer on it and got the survey, and it came back riddled with asbestos. And I was struggling with that decision. It didn't seem wise with my history, even getting rid of it. And I cried and cried and cried. And I took the offer off, put an offer somewhere else. Couldn't get it out of my head. Put the offer back on. So asbestos, I love this place. We're not going to worry about the asbestos. Get it removed, and that's that. So got it removed. A week or so, no, a month or so, I'm exaggerating, after I'd moved in, toilets, there was a drainage problem, and I got shit all over the first floor, basically, all over the new carpets, and sort of miserable. And I cleared that up. A lot of swearing and effing, and then it was the most terrible smell. I was just about to get the lodger, got the room all sorted, and it's like, oh, and it took a lot of visits, a lot of people to identify what the smell was, and eventually got rid of it. It hangs around even when the rat's gone, I can tell you. And and now it's lovely. And if Paul had been trying really hard to invent things, it'd be the worst possible type of things to, is this OCD really gone then? So, I think for me, it was by far the most important thing. As a therapist, I saw the expertise in CBT specifically for OCD, not generic CBT, not a little bit of experience with OCD. Crucial to me, and people are different about this, was the relationship with the person. I felt comfortable, more than comfortable. We're not just talking about sitting in a cafe having a nice chat. We're talking about sharing your most horrible stuff and someone witnessing you being terrified. So feeling really comfortable with that person. But the therapy was designed for me as an individual. It was not standard generic stuff. It incorporated all the different aspects of my mental health. The number of sessions were crucial. After 12, I wasn't recovered. After 24, I wasn't recovered. And absolutely crucial was going to the extreme with the anti-obsessional task, not just doing stuff that was within the normal range.
Okay, so the title of my talk is CBT, It's Not What You Think It Is. And actually, Karen's already done my talk, in a way, in many ways, and we discussed before we came up that the talks would be complementary. Karen, as far as I'm concerned, has made some of the most important points, some of the most relevant points about it not being a mechanistic sort of process. But when I was thinking about how to prepare this, I was thinking about, really as a metaphor about CBT as a set of recipes and things you cook up and so on. So, in terms of what's on the menu in terms of CBT, one of the things you have to realise is there's not one CBT, and it is just like food. In the sense that with food you can have anything from a couple of peanuts, a light snack, through to a feast, and that's what's called stepped care, where people are offered a range of different approaches to CBT, from self-help, guided self-help, computerized, telephone, Skype, right through to full CBT, intensive CBT, the type that Karen was talking about, and so on. I think if you're being offered CBT, you are entitled to know what it is you're being offered, and all too often people do not know what is they're being offered, and it's one of the questions that we perhaps need to address. Okay, so if you were going to invest a great deal, and Karen I think very eloquently talked about how much you have to invest in CBT, then you need to know a little bit about how the chef is trained and how they go about their work. There are also different flavours and ingredients, and CBT comes in many forms, and people will tell you they're doing CBT when they're doing all kinds of stuff, some of which is frankly ridiculous. You're entitled, I think, if you're sampling this, to know what you're being served, including what the ingredients are. And even within the same approach to CBT, there are different ingredients, and some people will emphasise feel the fear and do it anyway more, and some people will emphasise actually helping you make sense of things and changing that, more of that later. Sometimes you get a better meal if you cook it yourself, and actually, I'll come back to this idea, I think probably particularly this afternoon when I talk about getting the most from your therapy. But the reality is that therapists do not actually change you. They support you in making changes, and actually all good therapy, all good CBT as far as I'm concerned, is self-help. And actually a therapist is about actually helping you sort of maximise that, and I will be talking about that this afternoon. If you are not satisfied by what happens in a particular restaurant, you can go to a different restaurant. You can stop going to that one. I was talking to Mark earlier about the fact that at the moment, for physical health services, you're actually entitled to a choice. Within mental health services, that is not true at the moment. That will change, and I think it's next year that the choice agenda will be applied to mental health, provided the government doesn't back down. And I think it's very important we do not let the government back down on that, because all hell will break loose over the choice issue. There's already been reference to, I think, obliquely in questions, to postcode lotteries and so on. And right now, you basically, it's like school dinners. You sit down and you're given what you're given, and if it's beetroot, you can't stand beetroot, tough cheese, and tough cheese too. This is Karen. I was talking to Karen about this as we were walking here. And Karen said, yeah, she liked the analogy. She said, yeah, and sometimes you get food poisoning, and sometimes the serious point is that therapy can be toxic. And I'm sorry about this, but therapy can be toxic. It can do damage. It can do quite a lot of damage. And Karen also pointed out that actually the response to that wasn't necessarily to completely reject the thing you ate. If you ate shellfish and that gave you a bad stomach, then it might be that the next lot of shellfish might be better, and maybe it's worth persevering sometimes. And you need to look away if you have a sensitive stomach here. It was actually something that somebody said to me earlier in the week. I get some of the best ways of thinking about OCD from people with OCD, and somebody described OCD as like a parasite, and I immediately envisaged this enormous tapeworm. That's why you got to look away. Enormous tapeworm, which basically doesn't kill you. But again, Claire's film, actually, in a sense, the parasitic nature of OCD, Claire's film conveys so very well. And I really like the idea. I hate the idea, but I like the way of thinking about it as OCD as a parasitic thing. So it doesn't actually change who you fundamentally are, but it eats away at what you can do, and so on. So there's an interesting thought for CBT. So let's think about what CBT really is and how it works. And as I already said, Karen, I think, has unfolded that rather well. But it's based on a few simple ideas, really. And that's that people suffer from OCD because they, quite understandably, because of who they are and because of what's happened to them, think that situations linked to intrusive thoughts, images, impulses, and doubts are more dangerous than they really are. But on top of that, in addition, people who develop OCD have elements of what somebody called Jack Rachman called a tender conscience, which is a particularly good way of describing it. Jack really eloquently, in 1980, talked about tender conscience. I think that's a really good way to think about OCD. And you were talking about scrupulosity, I think, earlier, and people are scrupulous about all kinds of stuff. I think the whole of OCD, in a sense, could be seen as being scrupulous and careful. That means that they're particularly sensitive to fears of being responsible for ideas of harm which are arising from the intrusions they have. And that's usually going to involve some version of better safe than sorry and related issues. What good CBT does, in my view, and this isn't just CBT, potentially this is all good therapies, but CBT is the main show in town for this. Good treatment begins by helping the person to identify what is really going on, trying to make sense of what's happening to them. And the very first thing which works in that sense is beginning to make sense of how OCD works, how it kind of operates, how it parasites on you. And that's the cognitive bit in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's about understanding things. And even if the rest of CBT is about stop it, then you have to do that. You have to have that first bit because nobody, if the thought is that you will sexually abuse your child or that you will cause endless harm by not washing your hands, then in order to stop it, you have to have at least an inkling, just an inkling, that it's something other than death, destruction, and so on. That there is another way of thinking about this. And often it's implicit in therapy. It should, I think, be very explicit in therapy. It should be part of what is it. And it shouldn't just be, trust me, I'm a white-haired professor, or trust me, I'm a doctor, or trust me, I'm a balding professor, or whatever it is. Sorry, Mark, I couldn't resist that. It should be, don't trust me. It should be, work with me to find out what's really going on. And that, I think, is the essence of good CBT. So the cognitive part of CBT usually involves developing some version of what we sometimes call theory A and theory B. And I'll come back to what that means in a moment. If the person's going to begin to think about things differently, the different way of thinking about it also needs to make sense, because it has to fit with their past experience. It has to be rooted in what has actually happened to you and what you understand, how you understand the world. And that's not enough. It's not enough just to make sense of it. There's a thing we call insight, which just means agreeing with your doctor. I mean, the people with OCD are often described as having poor insight, and I think it's the therapists who've got poor insight in those circumstances. There's no such thing as poor insight on the part of someone with OCD. Someone with OCD has perfect insight into what it's experienced. The poor insight is coming from the other side of the table, something I'm going to talk about again later on this afternoon. What that means then is that it isn't enough just to make sense of it, but then it has to then be carried forward into your life, kind of in the way Bob Nihal said. You've got to take this into your life. You've got to take it into your life, and you've got to check out to see whether it really is true, because it's not about trust me. And trust me, it's not about trust me. and that then leads you into the behavioural bit of cognitive behavioural therapy, which is about actually choosing to change and making a leap of faith. And one of the things, when I'm teaching therapists, one of the things I talk about a great deal is the leap of faith. Not their leap of faith, but the leap of faith that people like, I mean, Karen was describing a leap of faith, basically. In order to take 18 years, 24 years worth of fear, and Karen conveyed it beautifully, Claire's video conveys it beautifully. To change all of that is going to take a lot more than stop it, and it's going to take a leap of faith. And some of that leap of faith is about the enormous trust which a therapist may be able to earn. They're not due it. The fact my hair is white, I'm a professor, forget that. It really, really doesn't matter. The fact that somebody has letters after their name, completely irrelevant. What really matters is the extent to which that person has worked with you to help you make sense of it. And Karen showed a bit of a sample of that process, which is not a short process. It's an enormously long process, actually, in some instances, and that's absolutely fine. Just back to this idea of competing theories, theory A, theory B, and it's kind of a hard come together, and I do think it sits at the heart of what we do, but it isn't necessarily always put in this way. But the bottom line is, somebody walks in to see me, then basically they have a particular view of what is happening to them. And fundamentally what people say to you is something like this: my problem is that these thoughts I experience they mean I'm going to kill my mother. And they mean that I'm basically, the kind of person who could kill my mother. I'm dangerous, I'm a psychopath, I'm a killer, or whatever. And what I have to do is to make sure that I don't do this. And to do this, I respond by I'm just not in the same room as my mother. Sometimes, sadly, I can't even be in the same town as my mother. I saw somebody who couldn't be in the same country as their mother. And so I avoid, and I might seek reassurance, which we'll come back to in a moment too. I'm going to ritualize, and I'm going to lock things up and so on and neutralize. And those are perfectly sensible things to do, because if you're a killer, and it's possible you're going to kill someone you love, then beware. And if I felt I was going to kill my loved ones, my family, then I'm going to do anything, including killing myself, which sometimes people do, to try to avoid that possibility. I would do that. You would do that. You don't have to. It's because the next bit means you don't have to kill yourself, because it's not actually. And actually, what you need to discover in those circumstances is that the problem is that they're a loving son. This person, this hypothetical person I'm talking, not entirely hypothetical person I'm talking about. They're a loving son who, quite understandably, has worries about the worst thing that can happen. And the worst thing that can happen, Mark alluded to this, I think and it hits you where you're most. And basically, if the worst thing that could happen is you could kill your mother, that is where OCD will get you. That is where it's going to get you, always. The very worst place. And that's why it is such torture. Anyway, but if you see yourself as, you see the problem as you have being a loving son who worries about the worst thing that can happen, and then they, quite understandably, then doing things to deal with the worries, but you need to be able to deal with those worries without making it worse. And so the response to that if you really believe that, or if you're beginning to believe that, you need to test that out, and that means to, just to confront your fears and discover what's really going on. And that's what CBT is. CBT is about discovering what's really going on. There are problems with that, and the problems with that are, just the difficulty in actually moving a lifetime's experience of living in a particular way with particular fears into this other way. And that's what I mean by the leap of faith, because you have to take a leap of faith there. Therapy will fail if people have no idea what theory is, basically. They have no other way of thinking about it. And that's the problem with Stop It. It's just stop it. It's just don't do that stuff, and it's meaningless. Also, sometimes it just might not make sense, and usually the reason it doesn't make sense is because it doesn't fit with the person's experience, and because the therapist has failed. The therapists fail. Let me be very clear. Service users, they may occasionally feel, I've not yet met a service user. I have failed service users. I have failed people who come to me, but they have not failed me, and that never, in my experience, happens. It is possible. There may be some bloody-minded people out there where that's going to happen, but I haven't experienced that in my understanding. And the other thing, and here's the rub, where it's not properly tested, where the person hasn't properly tested it, not necessarily because they can't make a leap of faith, but because they haven't been supported in the process of making a leap of faith. And again, some of what Karen talked about chimes with that. And sometimes we can't support people enough. And again, sometimes we fail miserably as therapists in this way. And we'll come back to this. That doesn't mean that the person can't be helped. It just means that they can't be helped by me, or Mark, or Claire, or whoever. There's more to it, because the other thing which I think should always be part of good CBT is not just about taking the bad stuff away. It's actually also about reclaiming life. And what Claire's video so eloquently portrays is the thing that myself and others sometimes refer to as the human cost of OCD. And it's the human cost of OCD which is the most painful, which makes you want to weep when you see that video. And the part of dealing with the human cost is to reclaim your life. And that's a really hard thing to do. Choosing the right therapist, ideally your therapist should meet these criteria. Should be someone you trust. Or, because you're not going to trust when they walk through their door. I mean, just because I've got white hair doesn't mean that people necessarily trust me. But that you believe you can come to trust. And some of that is about one of the things, again, when I'm teaching therapists, one of the things I do is show them a bit of very basic video, first meeting with somebody, and say, what's going on? What's happening here? And the therapist will say, oh, you're assessing the person. They say, well, what? Yeah, tell me about the assessments going on. They tell me about the assessment and risk and blah, blah, blah. And of course, they miss out the really important thing, which is that the person I'm speaking to is assessing me. That actually, when you walk into the room, like it or not, and Karen illustrated this rather, like it or not, I mean, you may try not to do it if you want, but it's not going to work. You're going to be assessing the person you're talking to. You're thinking, is this person that who will respect me, and I could respect them, and that, I think that's a necessary ingredient. If you do not feel respected, if you cannot be respected, then probably the best you can hope for is some sort of general somebody to see once a week who's not really going to help you. You need somebody who's good at therapy and helping people to make changes, and someone who knows how to avoid the most serious pitfalls. Not all the pitfalls. And again, Karen and I do a longer session, and we pick up the various pitfalls that I fell into. And one of the things that is remarkable for us as therapists is the extent to which people forgive us when we fall into the traps that we've often dug ourselves. And that is nice. I am pleased to say that. But there are pitfalls, and we do fall into them. And you also need somebody who's up to date. You really do. Right now, I mean, some of you said recently there have been developments in the use of antipsychotics in OCD. Yeah, which say that really it should not be used as augmentation anymore at all. Very clearly. If you're seeing a psychiatrist who's prescribing medication, you want that person to know about that study and understand it. there are different types of therapists. Right now we have high-intensity therapists, psychological well-being practitioners, low-intensity workers, psychiatrists, clinical psychologists. Look at that! What an amazing! There's a lot of those. I know what you're. Are you laughing at the occupational therapists? They're very good people. No, you're not laughing at those. Okay. Do your own quality control. Okay, you should do your own quality control. You do your own quality control by asking these questions. These will, I think, we're putting the slides on the website, are we? Yeah. These are going to go up on the website. And what you should do, if you want to do quality control, and if you're going to ask people, obviously the stuff like white hair you can assess quite visually, but baldness as well, Mark, so don't worry. But you need to ask them stuff. You need to ask stuff in the same way as you'd ask any other person who was going to work with you. And print out this slide and say, Professor Salkovskis in a talk in Newcastle said, I should be asking these things of my therapist. Do you mind? Is that all right? Because Professor Salkovskis, because it's really hard. Karen talked about how hard it was. And Ashley, I keep promising you that we're going to have another crib sheet about things you'd ask. And the idea, you shouldn't have to hide behind Professor Salkovskis, but the reality is you're going to get hostile reactions from some therapists. Some therapists are not going to like it that you ask those questions. If you can, walk away from that person, because if the therapist does not like you asking questions, they're a plonker. Trainings, and again, Karen talked about trainings, but actually, again, Stephen Cook on his blog, what's his compulsive flyer, talked about the experience he had with the trainee. And the trainees are a mixed bag. And as somebody who runs a training course, but I said this before the training course, trainees are not necessarily a problem because they're less likely to be dogmatic, they're more likely to be up to date, more likely to be enthusiastic and collaborative, and they're more likely to have supervision. And a lot of qualified therapists won't have those things. But do that assessment. Again, ask those questions of that person and work out, do I trust this person? And if the person says, no, I'm kind of sorry, I don't know too much about this, maybe either that they're going to work with you and you can help educate them, or maybe they'll signpost you to somebody else. But trainees are more likely to collaborate with you in that way. I'm so sorry, I've run a bit over time. I don't know if you... I'm very happy to take questions or to leave them till later, I don't know. That's absolutely fine. I'll make my afternoon session a bit shorter, which means I'll knock out a few slides when other people are speaking, and so there's enough time for questions. Thank you very much for listening.
So a little bit about me. My name's Charlotte, or Lottie. You might know me, I'm a moderator on the OCD-UK message forum. You might know me, I also have a blog, although I blog under the name Belzy, which is Obsessively-compulsively yours. Or you also might know me as the owner of this very supportive goat. So I come from France, and I've put a map up because everyone always wants to know exactly where. So there you go, I come from the west coast of France, although I am half English, hence the fact I can speak English. I actually spent last year living in Germany, but I'll mention that in a minute. So, I wanted to start by saying that I was a normal child, had a very normal childhood, but when I said that to my parents, they didn't seem to agree. So I think, yeah, I was a pretty normal child. I was very, very shy. I mean, even up until the age of sort of 18 or so, I would never speak on the phone, never speak at school or anything. And I was always a worrier, but, nothing that would predict what was going to happen. When I was 15, one of my brothers, I have a really big family, so I don't try and keep track of brothers and sisters, had a horrible accident, really terrible accident. He had a head injury and helicoptered away, and he's fine. But not long after that, I just started to worry. I think it was the first time that I'd had some sort of idea of the fact that I wasn't quite immortal, and neither were my family. And the worries sort of started about then. I used to come home from school every day thinking that one of my family would have been killed. I worried a lot about my brothers, and I worried a lot about my parents. And not long after that, the ritual started. So, to be honest, in retrospect, it was very classic OCD, although at the time I thought I was going completely mad. I started to not walk on cracks. I started to repeat things, and then that soon morphed into sort of counting obsession. So everything had to be done 4 times, or in 4 sets of 4, or it would just go on and on. I'd always been a very good student at school. I'd always sort of been a boring straight A geek, and suddenly I started having problems with neatness and symmetry, and I went from sort of doing very well in exams to never actually being able to finish one. I would just write the same sentence out again and again, and I just couldn't get it neat enough. I think my parents noticed something was going quite wrong. I started having problems actually going into school at all, and it was at that point that it all sort of broke down, and my parents said, you know, what's wrong, and it all came out. After that, I went to see my GP, who was very, very supportive. I was very lucky to have a GP in France who had heard of CBT and was able to refer me to the mental health team that dealt with CBT, because unfortunately in France we still have a largely Freudian approach to psychology. So I started CBT not very long after that, and it went quite well, to be honest. I had sessions with a therapist who, in retrospect, was actually probably quite good, giving probably quite good quality CBT, but I wasn't really ready to change. It was, by that time, my last year at school. I had my final exams coming up, and another brother was in hospital for 4 months during that last year, which was very stressful and led to a lot more worries, because the hospital was actually an hour and a half away, and just the drive I'd just be so anxious that my parents were going to get killed on this drive every day that it was just a nightmare. So when I finished my exams, I managed to somehow do quite well, and I had a place at medical school. And my therapist at the time said that he didn't think it would be a good idea to go. He said that he thought that my OCD was too bad, and I was the usual stubborn teenager and refused to listen. So I went off to university, and strangely enough, it all went quite wrong. So I think one of the main problems was that suddenly I went from being in this very big, very loud, very caring family to being responsible for myself, being responsible for keeping everything locked, for keeping everything clean, for keeping everything perfect. I was sharing a kitchen with 10 other students, and I spent a long time checking those hobs. I think a particular low point was when someone came in to find me in tears because I'd counted out my grains of rice and some had gone down the tap hole and I hadn't seen which ones. So I think, you know, it was probably not a surprise when everything started going very wrong. But then, around that sort of time, my OCD took on another form as well, in that one day my dad's a chef, and I was taking my knife home to be sharpened. And I suddenly had this thought, I'm going to kill someone, I could stab somebody. And I remember, even today, the horrific anxiety that I felt at that time. I just remember sitting on my bed in tears and just thinking, I'm a murderer. How can I even live with this knowledge? How can I live knowing that I could hurt somebody else? And at that point, I developed quite a strong fear of knives. I couldn't be in the same room as a knife. I wouldn't use a knife to eat. It was tricky. Steak was off the menu, but it all led basically to me dropping out of university. It wasn't really my decision. My parents and my tutors basically decided that, seeing as I couldn't really leave my room or read or write, that medicine probably wasn't for me, at that time at least. To be fair, they were right. I couldn't sit my exams, and at that time I dropped out of university. And for a couple of months, actually things were a bit easier. I was back at home. I had my younger brothers who were all very supportive and excellent at doing things to help me avoid doing them. And again, as someone said earlier, we were talking last night about some of the really creative reassurance that I've asked for. Yeah, so for a few months, things sort of got on an even keel, and then things basically hit rock bottom. And my parents sat me down and basically opened my eyes to what was going on and what it was doing to the family. I had become very, very difficult to live with, very, very controlling, and a lot was revolving around my OCD, which it shouldn't have been. And I basically realised at that point that things weren't going to get better on their own. Luckily, I was able to access some very good, quite intensive CBT, again, mainly through luck and knowing the right people. And I remember still to this day going in to see my CBT therapist for the first time, and I was absolutely terrified. And she made a very rude comment, very rude joke, and I just remember thinking, oh, I think I'm going to be okay with this woman. And I was, and I had a really good trust in her. She was absolutely fantastic, and we started to work on the CBT. I think I've got my picture of my first exposure thing. So this was one of the first things. My fear of knives was such that I couldn't even look at a picture of one, because surely looking at a picture was the same as holding one, which was the same as stabbing someone, and I couldn't be trusted with it. So one of my first exposures was actually just looking at pictures of knives, which sounds silly, but as anyone who knows, well, as you all know here today, sometimes with OCD, you have to start with the very beginning. This was my hierarchy, which I found the other day, which was quite strange. And I can honestly say that I only realised this morning was in French, which sounds incredibly precocious and terrible, so I'm going to skip it. I'll go back actually. So yeah, the CBT was hard, but it was also the best thing I've ever done in my life. And slowly but surely, I sort of started to put things back together. The pieces sort of started to fall back into place. I'd become really very isolated during this point. I had no contact with people from school because I felt like a failure. At school I'd always been top of the class and everyone would always say, oh, you're just going to do well. And here I was, 18 months later, having dropped out of uni, not really able to leave my bedroom, and there was a lot of shame involved. Something which I'm only now just sort of starting to get on top of. And so I was very, very isolated. My family were everything. And then as I started to get better, I started to reach out and try to rebuild my life. I mentioned my siblings. My youngest brother, who was 8 at the time, and he really quite liked the idea of exposure therapy. And he used to follow me around, and anything mean was classed with, but it's exposure therapy, which I didn't think was very fair, but there you go. So eventually I decided to go back to university, which was quite a big step. I was very nervous about moving away from home again. So this time I decided to study psychology, which was, I think, a surprise for everybody. Because when I left school, I had a place to read medicine and a place to read physics, and I was very much a hard science girl. And I'd fallen in love with psychology. And I still love it to this day, which is good. So I went back to university, and it was tricky, I'm not going to lie, but I coped. And about 3/4 of the way through the year, I had the strange decision, well, I made the strange decision to go to Germany for a year, which mainly happened because I'm a very stubborn person and somebody told me I couldn't, so I therefore had to prove them wrong. My parents thought I was totally insane, which I can understand their point. And for me, it was a really important year, not only because it was just a fantastic opportunity and everything, but because it put me really far out of my comfort zone. And I'd become so much better that I knew I could cope within my comfort zone. In France, there's a strange system where you basically go to your local university for undergraduate level. So I was always an hour from home, and although I knew I could cope in that situation, I needed to prove to myself that I was better enough that I could cope out of my comfort zone. And it was pretty much as far out of my comfort zone as you could imagine. But it went very well, and I survived. And I am back here, finishing my degree in France this year, and doing a lot better, a lot better. I wanted to share with you some of the sort of things that I've learnt through having OCD, most of which you will all already know, either because it's been said today, or you're all experts in OCD. As has been said 100 times, learn as much as you can about OCD. The fact is that it shouldn't be this way, but it is. We do tend to have to fight to get the treatment that we need and that we deserve. And knowing about CBT, knowing about OCD is really, really important for that. But also, at the end of the day, the more you know, the more you understand, the easier it will be. And, because sometimes a lot of CBT sounds really quite crazy. You want me to do what? But it does make sense. And some of the stuff that I've read has been absolutely fantastic. And there are hundreds of self-help books that you can see out on the stall, which is where I've been all day. And there is also the OCD-UK website, which has so much information on there. But there is something else I wanted to mention, which is OCD forums. OCD forum, it's an internet forum where you can post questions or anything on there, basically. And chances are that somebody on there will be able to answer, somebody on there will be able to, would have been there before. So, if you're just nervous about going to your first CBT session, or you've come back from your first CBT session, you want to tell us all about it, or anything, there's always someone there to listen, and I'd certainly encourage anybody to join. Okay, now the next point is going to sound negative, but stick with me. You will have bad days. Okay, I'm going to try a little experiment. Can you put your hand up if you don't have OCD? Okay. Now keep that hand up if you've never had a bad day. You don't have bad days because you have OCD. You have them because you are human. And unfortunately, we tend to think that we're a little bit more perfect than we are. And let's be honest, with OCD, we tend to have quite a lot of black and white thinking. A bad day is a bad day. It's not a bad week or a bad month or a sign of things to come or a slippery slope. It's just a bad day. Tomorrow will be better. We tend to set ourselves quite impossible targets, and we have to remember that at the end of the day, we are still human, and that sometimes things will be a bit shit. Oh no. Make a backup plan. There will be things that make your OCD worse. Everyone will know, and they're specific to everybody. For some people it'll be tiredness or stress or alcohol or hormones or a certain time of year. I know that my OCD is always a little bit trickier in January, where I'm not entirely sure why, but it is. I think it's probably short days and hangover from Christmas. Have a backup plan. If you know that at a certain time of the year your OCD is always worse, then anticipate that. Work out beforehand what you're going to do about it. It's really important not to be taken aback, taken surprise by these days, because you are more susceptible to be knocked back if you're not ready, if that makes sense. Okay, if at first you don't succeed, try again. I found this, which I really, really like. And I think it's very, very true. CBT is hard, and there's no hiding that. And as I've said again and again, it's hard, but it's also the best thing I've ever done. Find motivators, find plans, find excitements. As Paul said, have your short-term goals, your medium-term goals, your long-term goals. For me it was the fact that if I was able to eat with a knife, I'd be able to go out for a meal with my family. That was my medium-term goal. If I got better from OCD, I would be able to go back to university. I'm going to call that a medium-term goal. And I think it's really important to find motivators and plans and excitement. even from the very early days, and even if they sound totally tiny little things, sometimes it's really important. You know, I say to myself, if I do this thing that's really, really scaring me, I'll have a lovely cup of tea at the end of it. And, you know, it can be really simple things like that. Create a cheerleading team. Now, you see, I was going to say the hugging thing as well. My mum and dad, I used to ask for a lot of reassurance, and it was really tough for everybody. And as I sort of started to back down on that, my dad used to say, I know you're having a really, really crap day, and give me a hug. And actually, to me, that meant more than 1,000 reassurances. And I think that's really, really important. I've got people who will support me. I have people who I know I can text and say, I'm having a really difficult day, and who won't sort of engage in the OCD at all, will just tell me stupid jokes for half an hour, or talk about rubbish, and just wait until the anxiety passes. And that's a really important thing to find. I also just wanted to take a second, it's my beautiful family. I also just wanted to take a second to talk to all of the parents who are here, but not only the parents actually, anyone who is living with someone with OCD. We know it's really hard for you, and I don't think I will ever be able to thank my parents enough for the support that they've given me. They have been an utter rock throughout, and thank you to all of you, because sometimes we don't say it, and I think you get forgotten a lot. We're the ones going through the hard time, but actually it's really just as hard, and sometimes even harder for you. So yeah, on behalf of everyone with OCD, thank you. It's really important, and you're wonderful. So, recovery is not a sprint, but a marathon. It is really important to stay on top of things. And once again, it's hard, but it's worth it. Now, I'm a huge CBT fan, and I'm not shy about it. I think it's fantastic because I've got my toolbox full of things, and I've used it for all sorts of other things. I mean, the fact is that today, talking to you is quite a huge thing, because, you know, 5 years ago, I wouldn't even answer the phone or talk at school or anything. And that's all down to the wonderful joy that is CBT. I also made the decision a couple of years ago that good enough is not good enough, which, stick with me this one. I basically decided that I couldn't be 80% better, because when I was 80% better, I was still allowing some OCD in. And by still allowing some OCD in, I was still giving it credibility. And by saying, oh, well, those rituals are all right, I won't stop those rituals, is still saying that I believe in them, and I'm believing in their power. And for me, it was really important that good enough was not good enough, because I owe it. I don't only owe it to myself and my parents, I owe it to myself for the future. You know, in 10 years' time, I'm going to say, God, I'm so happy that I worked so hard at that. And yeah, it was hard work, but it is worth it. And it's really important to keep weeding out all of the bits of OCD. I haven't always been very good at recognising it, and I think that's also where your cheerleading team can come on. You know, sometimes my mum will say to me, I think that might be OCD talking, not you, and they're generally entirely right. And it is important to stick on top of it. As you start to recover, fill your life with other things. This has also already been said. OCD likes nothing better than a vacuum of time. By definition, OCD takes up a lot of time. And as we start to cut down on that time, we're left with a lot of empty gaps. And as I said, OCD likes nothing better than an empty gap. It is really important to fill this. It's important to get out, not only of the house, but out of your comfort zone. For me, I've joined a choir, I've done all sorts of things, not all of which have been a huge success. I think it's fair to say that I'm never going to be a rugby player, but I've known a lot of people who, I'm not glad that I had OCD. It was a horrible, horrible thing. It made my life a misery and that of my family and friends, but I think that a really, really important thing in life is making a good thing out of a bad situation. And a lot of the things that I do now and that I love, volunteer work or my degree or my music or anything like that, I would never have done before OCD. And I don't know. I'm just going to leave it there. Most of all, be hopeful. This has also been said quite a few times today. The minute that we start being negative, the minute we start thinking, I can't get better, my OCD is too severe, I've had it for too long, the minute we start giving into it, it just gets stronger. And it's really important to keep that hope. And I know it's not easy, I know it can be really, really hard, but it's so important to stay hopeful. It's really important to remember that tomorrow is another day, to remember that in 5 years' time you will be so glad that you tackled this now. And I sort of want to leave it there. I want to say that, you know, when I came to my first OCD-UK conference in 2009 in Bournemouth, it was just before sort of things hit rock bottom. And, you know, 5 years ago, I thought I would never ever go back to university. I thought my life was over. I didn't want to wake up in the morning because I thought I'd hurt people, that I was ruining everyone's lives, that I wasn't really made for this world, that all these sort of melodramatic things. And now, you know, when I got back from Germany, I just remember thinking, I feel like I can do anything, and I'm so glad that I kept that hope. And a lot of that was down to OCD-UK, and hearing other people talking and saying, you know, things can get better. And that's sort of what I wanted to leave you with today, just the thought that things can get better. And I think they will get better. And that's it, really.